have first video for me. It's a collaboration video, and hopefully we turn it into a series. My buddy Doug, Joe Wood Collector, who's just started on YouTube. Doug? How many months have you been on YouTube now?
I think like 9 months. Very limited videos, but yeah, 9 months
9
now.
months. Okay. And so I've been, I'm a veteran, even though you may not know, I've been on it for over 4 years. So, but no, the cool thing is me and Doug, we knew each other back in Indiana when I worked there. We worked actually at the same company at the same time. And we didn't even know each other until like, that we worked together until a little later. So we actually kind of bumped into each other in card shows, and then kind of figured out we work at the same company, which is kind of wild. And so Doug, like, you've been on YouTube for a little bit. What's your experience so far? How's it been treating you?
Yeah, it's been great. I don't get to make as many videos as what I'd like to, but the people that I've met, the people who I've comment with, I've got a lot of phone numbers of people. I just like the camaraderie of be able to look for something for somebody. If someone has a Joe Wood card or they see something, they usually contact me, which is fun.
So me and Doug are thinking about, starting a series, and we're really different collectors, but we have similar spheres of influence that we both like vintage, but we've also kind of reset our collections many times to get, since I've known Joe, sorry, Doug, I'm going to call you Joe. Since I met Doug, it's been a long time, and we've known each other, at least close to 15 years now, at least.
Probably 15 years, yeah.
So, over that time, when I first met Doug, he was a Rod Carew collector. I mean, that was sort of, he was a big time Rod Carew collector, like really, to me, like high up there in terms of like his quality of collection. And that's kind of completely changed. And then, I was always collecting Clemente and Pirate cards, but, I wasn't into, some of the stuff I'm into now, especially the 90s cards when Doug and I first started collecting together. So we both kind of modified and changed our collections. And, one of the things about me, I just turned 50, and it feels weird to say that, but it's like, now that, I've kind of been in collecting since 1986. I know Doug started a little earlier than that. When was your first kind of pack you opened, Doug?
The first pack I opened was in 69, but I hadn't started collecting yet. There was just a pack I opened at the canteen at the Little League baseball game, just to try my hand at it because everybody else was doing it. But I didn't start collecting until I think 71.
Can you go over kind of like that beginning for you compared to what you're doing today?
Oh yeah. Well, as you know, most of my collecting lifetime has been non-graded cards because I collected from 71, and I don't think grading come into the picture until the early 90s.
Yeah, early 90s, yeah.
Right. So, I had 20 plus years of collecting raw cards. Matter of fact, I know you and Russ and some other guys that we hang around with here in Indianapolis, collectors, they were always giving me a hard time because I had all these high grade, nice raw cards, but none of them were graded. At the time, I just had no reason to have them graded. At that time, I felt that I knew what the cards were. They were nice. I enjoyed them. I didn't see any reason to pay money to someone else tell me how nice they were. So, but that has changed. That has changed.
Yeah, and that's such a common origin story. I mean, and I know you had sets you built, were kind of a set builder, then a player collector, and now you're kind of into, I would call almost like super collector mode, where you're really a super Joe Wood collector.
Right.
And I know like today we were just talking before we came on about how many cards do you really have in your collection today?
Graded cards, I have probably 60 cards. So
Okay.
it's a small amount of cards. But
And
I
how
really
many
don't
cards?
buy anything. I don't buy anything that I don't like.
Hmm.
And I don't buy to resell. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't buy a nice vintage card, hold on to it, and it appreciates. I come across something I like better, and then I'll let it loose. But that's the reason I buy a little higher quality, is so that when I go to sell it, usually don't have any issue selling it.
So when you did your purge, so I know, so going back in time a little bit, me and Doug, we were kind of collecting. So I worked for Sentient Flavors. Um, I was a I was a senior scientist for them, which Doug can attest. So I've had this question many times: is am I really a scientist? So that's like a thing. So Doug can attest. He was actually in my lab. He got to see my lab, and he can attest that I actually was a scientist. I still think I am. I still think I'm a scientist. But he got to see in my lab. And I wore a lab coat every day, right, Doug?
Definitely, definitely. I had to come up and see it. We met at a card show, and like Jason said, we didn't realize that we had worked at this, same place. It was a decent sized company, and he gave me his business card, and he wrote his phone number on the back of it because I told him I would be interested in some other cards he had. And I got home and turned the card over, and I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't my business card. Whose business card is this? Go to find out that we work at the same company. But yeah, I would go up and see Jason up in his office and his lab coat and visit him all the time.
Yeah, it was a very different time. I had to wear a tie every day to work. It was not as fun as it is today. So much more laid back where I work today. But I think that's the thing. It was cool. It's like we met at a card show. In that card show group, Ross, he mentions our buddy Ross and the folks that were at that card show, which is kind of grown in size quite a bit. The promoter of that card show does the Midwest Monster now, so like he's grown his business. So a lot of us have kind of still collected and still do this, thing today. And I think it's really fun because you mentioned like the community. I mean, one of the things I always really regretted when I left Indianapolis was losing the community of collectors I was with, Doug, and going to shows together and collecting together and having that experience. And I got to New York, and unfortunately, just haven't been able to rebuild some of that collecting base. Even though I found some really fun folks to talk to and be with here, it's just I'm also pretty busy. I travel quite a bit, but losing that collecting base was tough for me. And that's sort of why I started YouTube, was to kind of like connect again with people and around collecting, and doing it at a pace that I could live with, and kind of control the pace. And so, Doug, why did you start your YouTube?
I really enjoy it. I mean, I was a lurker and watched a lot of different channels for a number of years. And actually, the very first video I remember watching is I was redoing my card room, and I wanted it to be a little more personal. I wanted to see what ideas other collectors had. So somebody said, well, why don't you go on YouTube and check that out? So I typed in YouTube, I put in card room ideas. And the very first person I ran across was Mike Baseball Collector, and watched his video. And I thought, boy, really got some good ideas. And that really got me going on YouTube. Then I really got to meet some people through commenting. And when you go to card shows, they're like, I know that guy. I seen him on YouTube before, and spark up a conversation. So, a lot like what you said, it was just a matter of getting a base of card collector people together and be able to talk about what we love.
Well, I think that's I think in general, just being able to have a forum to talk to people about cards is always fun. I know, like when we get together, it's like kind of nerd out. It's really interesting, like because I want to go back into like some of the collecting pieces. But we were at the National together. Me and Doug actually roomed together, and I through some events that happened in my family, I had my daughter with me. In fact, we were going on to a funeral later that day after the National, after we get done the National. So it was kind of a little bit of a somber for us anyway. I know for Doug, it's like, we travel all the way to get there, and it's like, oh, there's, I have my daughter with me, but it's not for a good reason, that we're together. But it was good though. Like she got to kind of hang out, but you could tell, like, we were card nerds, and she was not really interested in hanging
she was
out
a
with
trooper.
card.
She was.
She's a trooper.
I was surprised.
Yeah, she's on her way to college after this year. All we're doing now is traveling to see different colleges, and so she's getting ready to graduate. She's done really well in school. She's got good GPA, really high SAT score. So we'll see where she goes, but I'm really excited for her. But you could tell, like, like she'd rather sit in her room and order DoorDash and kind of have her own little space than hang out with the car guys. But that's the thing that, like, we want to talk about cards. We really like that experience, and I think it just shows, like, when we're together, as friends, and and get into that space, it's hard not to kind of like geek out over cards, and we've been doing that ever since we kind of met. And
Right.
But yeah, Doug, so we talked about, like, you started out as a big time Karoo collector. When did you decide to make the change, and what did you do to make that change?
Well, it was a hard decision. Like I said, I was a big Rod Carew fan growing up. Didn't get to see a lot of games, but I always got to see highlights, and appreciated Rod Carew, the contact hitter that he was, and all the 7 batting championships. So I started out as a set collector, like most kids did, but back then it was really hard to put a set together. I'm not even sure that I really ever completed a full set because all the different series of cards. You start out gangbusters with the first series, second series, third series, and then fourth series on started getting tough. It was harder to find the baseball cards. It got to the point where football season was starting to kick in. The football cards come out. You were excited to buy the football cards. And it was tough to find them. So that's pretty much the reason that the high numbers are tough now. But so I would never really ever put a complete set together. And I didn't really have any of my childhood cards. I'm not sure what happened to them, as a lot of people say. When I first got married in the early 80s, I took the hobby back up seriously again. And I started building my sets again. And then, of course, this is still pre-internet, so putting the sets together were really tough. I put together a 1971 Topps baseball set together. I think that was the first complete set, and it took me like 7 years to complete. It was ridiculous. I was super picky. It's the 71 black border set. And, you didn't have the internet just to hop on. So you just had to do local card shows, flea markets, that type of deal. So it took like 7 years to put that set together. Then I started every year, started working on another set. But I got tired of putting sets together and paying money for cards that I didn't even remember who they were. So I got to the point where I decided that I was going to collect a player that I really liked, and that's how I got started with Rod Carew. And then when the graded material, when I started doing the whole grading thing in the early 90s, I wasn't aboard at all. I was still buying raw cards. And then some of my buddies kept saying, yeah, you've got to send some of these in and get them submitted. And
I remember.
Yeah, they were pretty nice cards, although some of them I got scandaled on. Some 71s, I had some marker on the black border. I think some of them were trimmed, but for the most part, I did really, really well. And then that's when I started.
Do you remember like a card that graded super high that you end up selling for some good money?
Yeah, I do. I had a 65 Tony Perez rookie that I submitted and came back a PSA 9. Now, at that time, I think a PSA 9 was like $900 or something. Okay. I'm not sure what it is now. I'm sure it has to be more than $900, but
I'm pretty sure it's going to be more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. So I was surprised. Actually, I submitted 2. One was a 9 and one was an 8. So I sold the 9 and kept the 8.
That's a good plan. That's all. I did the same thing, you know. Like,
yeah.
Going through my collection all these years, it's like I don't have a lot of 9s, because if I got 9s, I would sell them to get more 8s. And
exactly.
Then with my Clemente collection, which I just put up, it's behind me now. I've started really putting it out for display in its totality. And I've never had my full Clemente card collection out for display, just because, you know, I just never had enough space for it, or like I getting some new holders to put everything into that makes them look nicer. But going through it, it's like I have 1 9 in my entire Clemente set, but I have 14 8.5s. So
well, you've had a few 9s. You've sold them, right?
I've sold them, yeah, or traded them. But yeah, like the 1 9 I have in my collection is a 73, which is the easiest one to probably get. But I graded it myself, so it's the 1 9 I kept because I did grade it and it came back a 9. Right. But yeah, and when did you start the purge, or kind of like switch over to the pre-war?
Well, pre-war has always been in the back of my mind, and by the way, I blame you for my obsession with pre-war.
Okay, wow, all right.
When we used to go to the Nationals, Jason would always say, "Hey, you know, my dad and I used to hunt for this card, or we really like these." And I always have that fascination with T cards and tobacco cards, anything pre-war. But I always thought I couldn't afford them. And so they kind of intimidated me. They kind of scared me, but I loved the history behind them. So they got to the point where my Rod Carew collection was at a point where I really couldn't add any more to my registry set without getting like PSA 10s of 1981, 1985, 1986 Carews. And that wasn't the direction I wanted to go with my collection. I was number 3 on the registry set for the master set, and number 3 on the base set, and had all the really tough cards in high grades. And I just got to the point where it got a little boring, and I was not going to go out and spend big bucks on modern cards in a PSA 10 just to up my registry. So at that point, I was like, yeah, I'm about where I want to be. And then that's when I decided that I was going to sell all my PSA registry material, and it was mainly all high 60s and 70s Hall of Fame players. And at the time, I got really good money out of them, and sold it all and dove headfirst into pre-war. And I haven't looked back, and it's been probably a dozen years ago.
How did you sell? Did you consign? Did you go to one dealer? Did you sell them individually to collectors?
I knew of some collectors that we used to go to at car shows. They were strong buyers. And
it wasn't Car Country, was it?
One of them was, yes.
Oh,
whatever I didn't sell through some other avenues, whatever I had left over, Jeff Foy bought.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
He paid me really well for him.
Yeah, no, I that's an ongoing joke between me and Doug. I'm not the biggest fan of the Car Country folks.
Yeah, He's a real nice guy, but we've had some bad run-ins with him a few times.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's one of those things where it's like I said, it's funny, me and Doug, we can go to the same show and have completely different interactions with dealers sometimes, to where it's like, oh, this guy, you know, his offers are really low, or he didn't come down on his cards, and then Doug's like, oh well, yeah, he made me a great offer, and like he paid more than the last one sold. I'm like, what's going on? Like Doug's getting
Right.
these like great offers. I'm like getting like 40% offers. Like what's happening here? Maybe I think Doug's had a much better personality, so I think he gets better deals because of that. But yeah, I think what was the other one? Even at the National this year, when we went by, I always forget his name, Chapel
Yeah.
Cards for the
Yeah.
first time. We because
Yep.
like he's always got really nice cards, but I know we both went there, and it was like I think Doug had his first experience, like my experience with Chapel is when he's very difficult to work with, and he kind of is high priced. And then
Right.
Doug's like, I've always had good experience with him, and I think that was the first time I think you had kind of like, oh, okay, well, this wasn't what I'm used to kind of experience.
Right. It wasn't. Yeah. I have always had really good, pleasant experiences with him. I've bought some really nice cards off of him, and he's always paid me really well for them once I turn them. A lot of the cards that I've bought from him, he's bought back from me a year later at a much greater price. So
Yeah, which is kind of which is great. But yeah, the National, I don't know, like he just didn't feel like his selection was as good, and in fact, in my opinion, like we were able to find every card that we were interested in, or I was interested at other dealer
at a
tables
cheaper price.
at
Yeah.
cheaper prices, and I think in some cases nicer condition.
Right.
Like it wasn't like we had to take a card that was let's say a lower quality just to make save some money. So
Yeah.
it was just one of those weird experiences, and I've Chapel for me has always been not just like he's always a nice guy,
Right.
but he it takes forever to get a deal done if you do any trading or selling. It's just like
But see, that was the opposite for me. He's always gone kind of out of his way to isolate me over to the side, work out a buy or sell or trade deal, and it's usually like half an hour at tops.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, but like the National, like when I sold my cards to Leighton, that was a pretty simple deal. Like
It
it
was.
really was fast. And
Yeah,
that's why
he's
like that's the kind of deal I
very
like to do.
efficient.
Like, and even though I actually turned down his first offer, I said no, we were gonna walk away, and he was surprised. He didn't realize who I was.
Yeah.
Like because I was dealing with his partner, and then when he figured out who I was and some of the shared experiences we had,
Right.
he
Yeah, he was a little surprised because that was
yeah.
a quite the experience.
Oh yeah, that experience the shared experience we had at the guy's house. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that was definitely interesting for me. And but like the thing is like we ended up doing the deal, and he was fine with it. And but it was just like it was a very simple way of doing it, and you can do deals really quickly if both parties are interested in making a deal.
Right.
The,
That's the
where
thing.
it's
Both
like
parties have
hard,
to be interested in doing it.
yeah, because later on, we were dealing with the guy that had the Joe Wood card you were interested in, that actually was bought by I'm trying to think of the person who ended up buying that Joe Wood card.
Oh, Dan?
Yeah, Dan, yeah.
Yeah. Dan's vintage
It
cards.
wasn't like the guy was hard to deal with. He was just, he's one of those classic talkers, like he was you need to talk to him for about half an hour before you get the good deal. If you
Yeah, you got to
for
warm
him to
up.
take some money off. You got to warm him up. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. Warm him up to get that good deal. So you made you so what was your first, because I know you went to Joe Wood, but what was your first pre-war card you really bought after you sold your stuff?
I believe it was the T206 Cy Young. I bought the T206 Cy Young, and then I bought the Red Border Cobb portrait.
Okay.
That
very
was probably,
solid starts.
Yeah, the very first two to buy. And then I think I bought E93 Wagner caramel card.
Nice.
And wasn't quite thrilled with it after a while. The thrill ran off pretty quick on that one. And
so did you
then
end up selling that one?
Yeah, end up selling that one, and I did real well on it. I guess I bought it right, and then I was able to buy the M116 Wagner, and
which is a great one. That's probably, if I was going to pick up another Honus Wagner, M116 is probably where I would go with it.
Yeah,
just because it's such a great looking card, and the fraction of, I've always viewed it as like the poor man's T206 Wagner. Like if you want to get,
oh yeah,
get a card as close to that T206 as possible. I guess you could say the one I have would be similar to that.
It is. Yeah, it is.
It's
It's a real nice portrait card. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but no, I think that is. And then when did you start getting Joe Wood? Because I know that wasn't, you didn't start with Joe Wood, but then you moved into Joe.
No. Well, it all goes back to when I was a teenager. I read the book Glory Other Times, and I had all the great characters and all the ball players from the early turn of the century, and for whatever reason, Joe Wood was one of the few names that just really stood out to me, so I think I read the book probably in the late 70s sometime. And so I've always had a fascination with him. And that's why when we go to shows, I'm like, oh yeah, I know who all these players are. So I had the interest, I knew the history. I knew who they were. So then I picked up the book again and read it several more times. And the more I read the book, Joe Wood just stuck out with me.
I almost bought a Mo Berg card. Actually, there was a batter up on, I think it was a 3 or 4. But Mo Berg always stands out for me as like, the stories around Mo Berg, the movie they did. I don't have any Mo Berg cards, but just because of his, like he's one of those players that wasn't a Hall of Famer, but had a huge impact outside of being the Hall of Fame. Joe Wood's not a Hall of Famer, but he has a big impact in the game, even though he didn't quite make the Hall of Fame.
Right. Yep. Real similar stories. I mean, the history behind it and the story behind it is just really fascinating. Well, that Mo Berg cards really took off here since that movie came out.
Yeah, it's I would say that it's had a huge effect, and also just it's very rare when you see players who did something that extraordinary outside of being a player, right? And I think we'd all agree that if they would ever do something with Ted Williams, like he's probably the closest to a real life John Wayne, like someone who was
definitely
literally a hero, like
yes,
did things that like flew planes and did crazy stuff
in both wars, World War II and Korean War.
In Korea, right? And the fact that if he would have just played, he would have probably set so many records that would still stand today, from the counting records, right? The counting, like the number side of it. To me, I think Ted Williams is probably the most underrated of all players because of that factor, where people don't take into account that like Warren Spahn, Bob Feller, those guys also suffered tremendously on their career numbers by going to the war. But Ted Williams, not only suffered from that, losing that time period, but during that time period, he did things that no one else was doing either. Like he was literally like a war hero, among war heroes. Like he did a lot more than a lot of other folks, and that and I don't think anyone's really recognized it. I think Jackie Robinson, his exploits have caught up to his prices. Like, like
Right.
he should have been more expensive in the 80s
Years
and
ago.
90s than he was.
Right.
Ted Williams should be more expensive today than he is comparatively. Like his card should have that, hero and that war hero type premium, and
Yeah.
they don't. And I feel like he's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle. Same way for Sam Musial. Those guys were much better than
Yes.
their prices because, and just like with Willie Mays, and we love, Mickey Mantle is great, but Mickey Mantle can't hold a candle to Ted Williams, his
Correct.
career, and
I
same way for
agree.
Willie Mays. It's
Right.
just Mickey Mantle was great, but he's nowhere near the player that Ted Williams was in his prime. And same way for Willie Mays. I mean, it's just those guys are just better players, and I would probably argue that Stan Musial was probably a better player than Mickey Mantle. If you just looked at the player in just in an aggregate of like, who would you win more games with over their career? It'd be all three of those guys would be above
Right.
Mickey Mantle. But that's an interesting thing is like, you look at Joe Wood, and because I've heard a lot of people trying to compare him modern rise to like Rick Ankiel, a player who went from being a pitcher to a batter. But again, Rick Ankiel never did anything as a pitcher outside of that 1 year.
Right.
And then as a hitter, he was very average. Like the best thing you can say is he was an average hitter. Whereas you could say with Joe Wood, he was good at both. Like he was a star at both. Definitely. And just had a short career.
Right. Yeah, he actually batted 361 in 1920, I think 1920 or 21 with Cleveland. It was a heck of a year. And I think his lifetime batting average is like 288. So
yeah, no, it's what I'm saying. Like he was a good player both ways. I mean, and was, you could put a thought like he was like an all-star hitter and all-star pitcher, just didn't sustain it, probably due to injuries and things like that, to where like, Rick Ankiel, isn't a great comparative, just the fact because he hit and pitched both, but he didn't have near the career of like.
But I think that's the only common denominator between those two is that they both were a decent fielder and a pitcher. Yeah, the transition was good.
Like, would you buy pre-war cards and graded? And if you do buy graded, between SGC and PSA, which one do you prefer?
As far as the grading, I don't really have an opinion on that. But the actual slabs themselves and the way they're displayed, I prefer them being in an SGC slab. I just think that the cards appear a little nicer in those slabs. I was talking to you right before we came on about an SGC submission that I just sent in, and one of them was a PSA card from my Joe Wood collection, and it was in one of them crazy older PSA baggies, which just irritates me. So I'm going to have it crossed over to SGC. Now there are some cards that I have in PSA in my collection that I won't cross over. But they're also not in the baggy type PSA holders. So they're fine. I mean, I agree with the grades. Although I think the grading has got a little stricter from both companies in different ways. I have some PSA and I have some SGC cards that I am very comfortable with, but I don't believe that the grades that are on the slab really correlate with what they should be. I think the standards they're saying, the grading companies are saying that the standards haven't changed. But I honestly believe that they have.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if you're PSA, it makes sense because they have that guarantee, right? they have some
Well,
money in this. They have skin in the game to get it right and not make, say, egregious errors like grade fake cards or overgraded card like miss a crease, to where you could use that policy to get your money back. So they definitely have an insurance to make the cards to grade them harsher than SGC does, even though they're under the same umbrella now. But we were talking about, with my experience, because I'm more of I was flipping cards, grading, crossing over cards to sell back, for the last 10 years. I've been doing that, and I've done about 150 cards that way. In my opinion, is just this: is that between the two companies, they both make mistakes, and they both
sure.
have cards under and overgraded. So I don't think that there's that much difference between them. But if I was just going to take one trend, is that in general, SGC misses more, let's say, big stuff than PSA does, in my opinion. Like, PSA can make mistakes, but I've seen SGC cards that you just, when you pop them out of the holder, you're like, how did they miss that? Like, there's something pretty egregious. And I just think I've chalked it up to that sometimes their holder and their encapsulation sometimes damages the card. I've shown videos on my channel about that.
Right.
The T3 holder, for example, is way too flimsy for that card,
Right.
and the card can slide underneath the insert and it can damage the card. So to me, it's like that's the stuff that I see with the SGC. But on the grading side, me and Doug talked about this earlier, was there are some also just big differences in how they look at cards. For example, the big one on cut cards, SGC will sometimes give cards a number grade that are missing, let's say, the black on a let's say a postcard that that doesn't have the black border all the way around it, where
Right.
PSA, if you're missing any of the black, they grade that card authentic.
Like the bazooka cards.
Like bazooka cards or like the post serial cards, like they're very strict. Another one we talked about is angle cut. PSA right now just destroys angle cut cards. Whereas SGC might give it a straight grade, PSA will knock it down 1 or 2 grades, and they've been knocking some stuff down for me, like at least 2 grades. It'll be a SGC 8 and it'll be a PSA 6, and the only thing wrong with it is it's got a
The
slight
angle
angle
cut.
cut. And so if you start memorizing some of those differences, Doug mentioned, like hey, there's if there's a wrinkle on the front, SGC might give it a 4, whereas PSA will give it a 3, based on
Right.
their grading standards. That's a great call out. So I feel like the one thing that you have to do is you just have to know that there's differences in those standards, but also, like, they're great tougher today than they probably did in the old days, in the early 90s, especially. But again, you have to understand that they probably undergraded cards in those days too. So
They did.
this
Yeah.
general thought that every card that was graded in the 90s and the early 2000s is way overgraded is not true. They missed cards back then too. They made mistakes back then in terms of they undergraded cards as well, overgraded. And I've seen dealers try to take your cards now and say, well, I'm only going to give you 60% because it's an old flip. I'm only
Yeah.
going to give you, and they're doing that because they can just use that idea that they're overgraded to try to really
It's a
hammer
ploy.
you into a worse
It's a
deal,
bargaining
when you
ploy.
know what they're going to do. Yeah. And what they're going to do is they're going to walk over to PSA or SGC and just get it in a new slab.
Right.
And
But they can't change the
unless
number.
there's something really well, the only way they're going to change the number is if there's something egregious, like if they missed
Right.
a crease or if they missed
No, I
something.
meant the certification code.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, that was the old ploy back in the day. I mean, I know, like with Memory Lane. Memory Lane had a lot of these auctions where they would set these records, and then mysteriously that same card would appear in another auction, and it's kind of like, well, did they really even bring that much money, or are you just faking your auction totals to make your auction look good? Then memory lane did this thing where they would just send the card to PSA and get the cert numbers changed. So it'd be the same card with a different cert number. Then people started doing photo matching. It'd be like, it's the same card, it's just a different. And and collectors are smart, and I think that's the one thing that these guys don't understand is like, and it's also like we get scammed so often that our scam radar, if you've been in the hobby a long time, goes off, and where you start smelling it might not be right, and then all of a sudden it's like a pack of wolves. You put one comment on a message board like, do you think this card, and then all of a sudden you have 40 people examine it and tell you like if they think it's the real thing, and then all of a sudden it kind of takes off from there. It's hard to get away with stuff in the hobby.
Right.
If you do it for an extended amount of time, you can maybe do it once in a while but people generally, if you scam for a while, you'll get caught in the hobby.
Yeah.
And the problem is that they never go away. Like, we get a lot of scammers that stay around forever. I mean, King Golden is now the king of the hobby, and he was like scamming people on Home Shopping Network, in the 90s. So,
right.
It's kind of throw your hands up. Like, what does it take to kill some of these folks? They never really go away. They just kind of like change, they rebrand and kind of come out with a different game.
Vintage cards are like, to me, they're like fingerprints. Every vintage card is, it's the same card, but they all have different characteristics. They all have a different fingerprint.
Yeah.
You can take them out of a holder, reholder it, and collectors are smart. I mean, they do their research, and they can find it even if it's in a different holder.
So that's a good point, Doug. Like, I think one of the things that we always discuss when we're at shows is, should you overpay for a card? When should you lean in a little heavier? Like, let's say you find a card that you really want, but it's priced, let's say above the last, time it sold, like that whole argument of like, when should you overpay? I've always said, like, one is how quickly can you find another copy of it? And two, how nice is the copy that you found? And to me, it's like, if that copy is super nice, much nicer than normal, that's one factor to go all in. The other one is if you don't see him ever, like, it's kind of like it's a ghost card. You don't ever see that card. You may have to pony up more money for it just to get it, but because you're in a market for what you collect. That definitely happens quite a bit.
Definitely. I've been caught a few times on the bad side of some transactions where I thought I would rely on comps too much. So I would look at comps, and when comps are years old since the last time a card is sold, you can pretty much just throw comps out the door. And if it's a card that you are only seeing every 2, 3, 4, 5 years come to the market, comps are non-existent. You have to pay whatever the market price is at that time to get it, or you may not see it again.
Yeah. I call it like the opportunity cost, like, do you have the opportunity to ever find it again? And is it cost going to be that you're going to overpay worth it just to not have to worry about finding that same copy again, and just kind of checking that check on your checklist, like, it's done, I don't have to look for this card ever again.
Right.
But I do also think too is, as a collector, it's a weird thing because we hate to be scammed. Like, the other thing we hate to do is we hate to overpay. Like, there's this big thing inside the hobby where it's almost like the worst thing you can do as a collector is to overpay. Like, it's almost like a scarlet letter, like, because when we were at the National, 90% of the conversations amongst the collectors that we were talking to was how good a deal I got. I underpaid. I got this at, at a good price. Like, very rarely will someone say like, well, I paid way too much, but I love the card. That conversation happened a lot less often than I got a good deal.
Yeah. But it's happening a lot more. It's just that, people aren't willing to let loose of that information.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
But it's like we always want to be like, look how good a deal I got, because that's like, it's almost like you got the card plus you got a good deal is like a perfect scenario, right? Like
Right.
you did a good job. I overpaid and the card kind of sucks. It's not a good story that most people want to tell.
Well, I cannot tell you how many times that I felt that I've overpaid for a card, and I had that buyer's remorse. Like, I really wanted the card. I probably overpaid for it. But it's all relative to when you bought it. I mean,
Right.
a year or two down the line, you might be right where you want to be, or you might be way ahead. And that's like when I was collecting high grade Carews for my registry set. Looking back, I was thinking I could have bought 8s and 9s of all those Carews and been really, really picky. But at that point, I was buying the slabs just as much as I was buying the card.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of times I should have been a lot pickier, because there's just a ton of that out there.
Yeah.
I mean, comparatively.
Yeah.
Compared to what I'm into now.
The conversation that we had the National together, I thought it was a really good conversation, was when we both kind of realized how much of 50s and 60s materials is out there. And then also how many T cards exist. It's just, you go to the National and it feels like there's just so much 50s and 60s and then obviously 70s and stuff. But like, it's overwhelming how many times you can go to the table and see the exact same cards, sometimes in the same grade, some variation. But then it's just like, it really dawned on me that like 50s and 60s material and then T cards aren't really rare and aren't really special. High grade and they're still cool cards. I'm not saying that they're not cool, but it's just like there's so much more out there than what I really thought. When I first started collecting, because you mentioned budgets, like I was like, hey, I can't afford these super rare cards. I can get a 72 Willie Stargell, but I can't get the 63. I don't have enough money. Now I look at it like, I'd rather get an E card or a candy card or something from the 90s that's really rare than something that's got pop counts in the thousands. And it just feels like the 50s and 60s. And sort of that's my epiphany, where I said I'm going to start selling my 50s and 60s and 70s cards to buy more pre-war and 90s cards. And obviously I was not treated with a lot of kindness by a lot of collectors for going in that direction, but sort of the change I made in my collection. I know you've gone from raw crew to pre-war, but I've kind of went away from the 50s and 60s into some pre-war, but a lot of 90s. And it just, I think it's just, you got to do what you think's best. But, from your perspective, like, do you feel the same way about that kind of material?
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, obviously when I was collecting the 50s, 60s, and 70s material, I just thought, that is where I needed to be. Because when you go to a local card show, you don't really find nice high grade material at those type of local shows. So it's when you go to the big national shows or big regional shows, and then you realize how much is actually out there.
Yeah.
And then I used to think that T206 cards were, extremely rare. And I think it was just the mystique that it was a T206 card and its age. But now I like T206 cards because they're an epic part of the collector's mentality. But the T206 common backs, Piedmont and Sweet Cap, there is no shortage of them at all. And I think that's why that the rarer backs on T206s have gone through the roof in the last 10 years. People are starting to realize that now, but it's great. It's a great tool. I don't get into the rare backs on the T206s. I just like to have nice, solid 3 to 5 good looking grade cards with Piedmont and Sweet Cap backs. Now, some of the E cards and some of the M cards, I like the different backs. I like the rare backs. But my budget cannot afford to get rare backs on T206 cards. Fortunately for me, Joe Wood does not have any cards in the T206 set or the T205 set, which kind of saddens me. I wish they did, but I'm glad for my budget that he doesn't have those T205, T206 cards that have rare backs, because I would want them.
Yeah, no, I feel your pain, or I feel the pain with Chief Bender getting those rare backs, and I haven't really approached it too much. I mean, I have a few. I have Sovereign, I have some American Beauty, I have some El Principal DeGale's backs. Like I call them like the mid tier. Like not the super rare. Not the Drum, not the Uzits. Not the really crazy backs that bring a ton of money. But I did get my first coupon this year. I got a Type 1 coupon.
I like that card.
I like that card a lot too. And then on my T227, I did get the Miners back, which is, I guess it is the more rare of the two backs with the T227, which I'm really glad I got the T227. It's actually sitting right here. Yeah. So, which,
it's a beautiful card. Beautiful card. I like the 227 because they have the nice blue background or the nice yellow background, and they really stand out.
Yeah, the Miners extra back. I was really excited to get this card because I had a 2, I think, originally, but my original T227 I had a Bender was really ugly. It was probably my least favorite of the rarer cards I had, and this was a really nice copy as a 2. It presents really well. So I'm really excited I was able to get the card back with a tougher back. But it's just how it goes with with pre-war, is like there's such a variation in the 2s and 3s between a card that looks amazing and a card that looks like it went through spokes in a wheel of a kid's bike. What you thinking about maybe getting for the end of the year and kind of for next? So I'll start here. So Doug, as we get towards the end of the year and you're looking forward for next year, what cards and what things you're looking to add to your collection, and kind of is there anything that's coming up in some auctions that you're looking at?
Yeah, fortunately there's several cards. I'm a little hesitant to give that information out, but of course it is Joe Wood material.
Competitive, right? Like
very competitive.
People, it might be a small, not as big of a collecting base as like Mickey Mantle, but there's still enough that it's going to be tough for you. So and for me, I think end of the year is like I always it's a weird thing. I always wait till about December, right around Christmas, to kind of look at hard again, because sometimes there's deals in that Christmas time period, especially on the cards. I don't do as not really on the pre-war cards, I would say, but more on like the 90s stuff, and you might sneak a good deal in there too, or people are trying to sell right before Christmas. I've had a few people reach out to me on some pretty rare Frank Thomas and Griffey cards, so they're trying to kind of move before the year's over. So I might make a deal on a card or two like that. But I kind of feel like going into next year for me, like I've completed my Calente set, and I want to finish either Hank Aaron or Mays. It's more realistic for me to finish Aaron than it is to finish Mays for next year, because I'm A, closer, but B, I still need the bigger cards for Mays. I still need the 53 tops, the 52 tops, the 51 Bowman, so I've got a few of the biggies to get on the Mays. Whereas the Aaron, I really just need the rookie card. After I get the rookie card, I pretty much have him wrapped up.
Right.
There's no really big cards left. So to me, I can get the base Aaron set done next year. So yeah, I think, going into next year, I know for you, are you thinking about expanding out besides Joe Wood into some other players at some point?
Yeah, I had a project going and I completed it. I did the first inaugural class of the Baseball Hall of Fame, all the players from that class, and I'm working on the second class right now. If I would stop selling cards in order to purchase other cards, I would have had the second class already done. A new project that I will be starting on is the T207, 1912 T207 Boston Red Sox team. I'm going to try to accomplish that.
Wow.
So I already have several of the big cards. And so I've been trying to get nice, attractive in the 3 to 4 range on the T207s and put together the 1912 Boston Red Sox team set.
Wow.
So it should be nice, challenging.
Yeah. Well, it'd just be amazing to see it together too.
Right.
So yeah, I think we'll end it here. I think next time, I think me and Doug will definitely get together. I want to go through some auctions, because Doug's really tied into the auction houses, and I'd love for us to maybe show some cards in those auction houses and talk about them a little bit, because Doug can really educate me. I know he mentioned I kind of started him on some pre-war, but he's definitely really surpassed me in the knowledge and experience there. So I think we'll talk about some pre-war. Hope you guys like this format. We'll continue to have our discussions, and I just want to say, me and Doug both, what we have in common is we're collectors. Even though we both sell sometimes, I'm more of a hoarder than Doug is. I have a lot more stuff, but we're collectors, and if you want to talk collecting, and get some information and always try to educate, I think this is the right channel, and this is the right space to be in. Again, check out Doug's channel, Joe Wood Collector. I'm Cards and Comics, and Jason and Doug will be back with another episode, and hope you guys liked it, and we'll see you next time.